Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon when you're watching this video lecture. After the completion of Unit 1 of Chapter 1 related to determination of national income, let us move on to Unit 2 of this chapter, which focuses on the Keynesian theory of determination of national income. Of course, majorly this is focusing on the theory proposed by Keynes, one of the famous British economists, and in fact many aspects that we learn in macroeconomic perspective were in fact originally promulgated by Keynes. So we can say he is one of the most famous and popular economists who has changed the macroeconomic understanding itself completely, initially in the Britain and later throughout the world. And without Keynes, we cannot imagine macroeconomics at all. But of course, in the other chapters later, we will touch some of his other theories also related to fiscal policy and all. But here, our focus is on his theory of determination of national income. And he has suggested, or one way we can say, imagined three types of models. One is a two-sector model, which is a very basic model, assumption only, but imaginary situation of only two sectors working in an economy. And same way, three-sector model and four-sector model. So basically, he has told about different possibilities of an economy. Of course, once again we have to understand, reality definitely will be the highest one, that is the four-sector model, what we can see now. But in order to reach there, for that understanding, we have to start with two-sector model and then keep on adding one more element to that. And that is the objective, or we can say the structure or learning outcome of this particular unit. And in this concept of different types of models, investment multiplier concept has been promulgated by Keynes. That is also a very important concept, and that really is one of the aspects that every person who looks at macroeconomics should understand and apply wherever required. So broadly, this entire unit is all about understanding three different models: two-sector model, three-sector model, four-sector model, and also understanding the concept of investment multiplier. Let us start with basic model, that is two-sector model. So prior to that, what is this Keynesian theory and when it was published, general knowledge wise? British economist John Maynard Keynes published one of his famous books, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, in 1936. So that old this book is, but a lot of aspects and concepts are now also followed by many countries. And what he has presented in his theory of national income, which is only one part of this entire book, not that entire book is all about national income, but yes, the portion which focused on the national income was presented in three different models. Those are two-sector model, three-sector model, and four-sector models. What are those sectors we are talking about? The two-sector model consists of only households and business sectors. That's all. That means no government exists. It's an imagination, not reality. As I said already, reality is only four-sector model. Two-sector and three-sector are theoretical models which provide the theoretical and conceptual base so that we can reach to four-sector model. But in order to go there, first we should understand two-sector model, how it works. So that is a base model, two-sector model, having only two sectors. One is households, second one is businesses, enterprises. Three sector model will have anyway households and businesses. So one more additional thing is added here, that is government. So three sector model consists of household, businesses and government. And fourth sector model consists of anyway all the other three, household, business, government also are already there. Then one more sector is added, that is foreign sectors. Foreign means some trade between this country and other countries. Other than the country we are talking about, every other country is a foreign country. So this is one of the important points that everybody should keep in mind. Like in one of the jokes, one person from a village in India gets a lucky draw and goes to London. And there he was very excited by all the people who are all there around him and all. And he calls his mother on the day when he arrived at London. And he tells his mother, Mummy, do you know? All the people here are foreigners only. So that's what our idea is related to foreign and foreigners. They are not foreigners in their country. They are locals. You are foreigner there. So foreigner does not mean a white-skinned person or anything else that like imagined by mostly less educated people. Not like that. Foreign is anything that is not domestic. Simple. So if that sector is also added, for simple words, exports, imports, nothing else. What else will be there in foreign sector? Export, import. Majorly that will be there. Of course, nowadays, export, import of what? That could be anything, not necessarily goods. It could be of goods or services or even capital or even labor. All of them are part of international market, international trade. A very big discussion on how the international trade happens and what are the various nuances of international trade is all contained in chapter 4. Anyway, we'll discuss them in detail later. For simple understanding, whenever we say foreign sector, we simply have to understand it is about exports and imports. Enough. For now, it is enough. So, these are the three types of models that Keynes has presented. Two sector model, three sector model and four sector models. Let us start with two sector model first. As we just now have observed, this has only two sectors. What are those? Only two. That is, one is households, other one is firms, means businesses. So households are naturally the consumers of the goods and services. Businesses are the providers of goods and services. That's all. Only two sectors are there in the economy. Assumption it is, that has to be kept in mind while understanding the theory. But once we have that in mind, we have to understand the theory as the theory says. That's all. Not that we have to apply it every time. Not possible, because this itself is an assumption. So when we assume that there are only two sectors in the economy, namely households and firms, how that kind of economy behaves, that is what we are trying to understand and predict or assume. Of course, what do households do? They own all the factors of production. They own the factors of production. Like labor, they are the ones who have to work. People have to work. Or land, or for that matters, let us say some capital also. So, assumption is that they own all the factors of production and their job is to sell their factor services to the firms and earn factor incomes, and those incomes are entirely spent to consume all the final goods and services produced by business firms. In other words, there are no savings, no retained earnings, no investment, etc. So that's a simple assumption, once again, not reality. So there are two sectors only. One is households, the other one is, let us say, business, for simple understanding, or enterprises or firms, whatever we can call them. Households will provide the factor services, businesses will receive the factor services, and Businesses will produce the goods and services. Households will consume those goods and services. That's all. That is how the two sectors are interrelated with each other. And the households will consume all the goods and services which are produced by business firms. That is an assumption here. So naturally, what the business firms will do? What is their job? They will hire the factors of production from where? Naturally provided by households. And the firms will produce and sell the goods and services to the households. And they also do not save. Neither the households nor the firms will save in the two-sector model. Whatever is produced is already consumed by the households. But who is producing? Firms. Who is consuming? Households. That's all. That is a simple two-sector model. We can say these are the key features of two-sector model. That can be a question by itself. And of course, there are no corporations in this case, and no corporate savings, no retained earnings. None of them are there in a two-sector model. And some more features of two-sector model can be studied like this. Here, the total income that is produced, income is here national income, let us say, that Y, if it is represented as, that accrues to the households. Whatever the households are earning, that is the total income that is produced, and that equals to their disposable personal income, that is YD. So earlier we have understood the concept of personal income and disposable personal income. So here we can say under two-sector model, national income is equal to personal income. Personal income is equal to disposable personal income, because the entire national income comes to ultimately households only. Ultimately, they are the ones who are providing factor services and receiving some income. So the national income is completely coming to households. That is Y. And that is equal to disposable personal income if you represent it as YD. So simply Y is equal to YD. That is the feature of a two-sector model, assumptions we can say. Or if the question says what are the assumptions in a two-sector model, also you can write the same things. These are all assumptions only. There are only two sectors. Households will provide factor services. Business firms will receive those factor services. Business firms will produce and sell the goods. Households will consume those goods. None of them will save, and there are no corporations, corporate savings, or retained earnings. And income earned by the households is equal to their disposable personal income also. Now can you say why? Why is that? Because there are no taxes. What is the difference between personal income and disposable personal income? That is income tax. But because in the two-sector model, government does not exist. There is no government here. So since there is no income tax, that is why entire income is disposable personal income. That's the other assumption under this model. And all the prices, including the factor prices, the supply of capital, technology remain constant. That is a common assumption. Always whenever you have a theory, that theory will not be valid if everything is varying simultaneously. So naturally, the supply of capital, technology, and the prices of the factors also are all constant. They are not changing. So there is no price mechanism that is happening here in two-sector model. And since government does not exist, there are no taxes. So there is no government expenditure. No. And naturally, there are no transfer payments. Who will do transfer payments? Government has to do. If government itself is not there, who will do? There is nobody. So no transfer payments, no taxes, no government expenditure in two-sector model. These are all assumptions. And naturally, the economy can be called as a closed economy because the foreign trade does not exist. That means there are no imports, no exports. Once again, no government, no foreign trade. No government means no taxes, no transfer payments, no government expenditure. No foreign trade means no imports, no exports. And all the investment outlay is outflow, that is autonomous. And entire investment outlay is autonomous. Means it is not determined by the level of income also and the rate of interest also. It does not have any impact. That is what we were talking about. The prices, once they are constant, always they are constant, then there is no point of having any interest also. Why interest is required? Why there is a possibility of change in the value of any money? Imagine there is no change in the prices of certain things at all. then there is no much of requirement for interest. That will be very less even if it is existing. So the point of rate of interest or the level of income are not going to have an influence on the investment. Investment is completely autonomous, means according to the whims and fancies, according to the requirements of the people, they will do the investment, not by taking the level of income or interest rates into consideration. But normally that is also not a possible thing or a practical thing. Practically what happens in reality, if the rate of interest is low, investment will be high, because the industrialists or businesses can take the loans at a lower rate and invest it into building some new factories or new companies like that. But here, since the investment is autonomous, it has no relationship with rate of interest also or level of income also. These are all the various assumptions under two-sector model. If this question is asked, at least some of the key points you should write, and you can combine some of the points also, so that ultimately most of the points are covered here. That is the basic list of assumptions in a two-sector model. And this can be considered as a graphical representative of the circular flow in a two-sector model. So what will be there here? Only two sectors are there. One is households, one is firms. Look at this here. What the firms are giving to households. What firms are giving to households? These are all the things that they are giving. Firms will give wages, rent, interest, profit, and other things, which are all nothing but factor payments. That is why. Why is the income to households? Then what households are giving to firms? Households are giving to firms consumption. That is a consumption expenditure. That can be called as C. So households consume. So that is expenditure from the households part. And firms are giving to the households their income. So naturally, expenditure of households is firm's income. Expenditure of firms is households income. Both are same. Ultimately, at a broader level, both will be equal. But what is the flow we have to understand? How the households are repaying the firms? By consuming whatever the firms have produced or rendering the services. And how firms are repaying the households? By giving them factor payments like wages, rent, interest, profit. That is the other thing that is happening. But why is it happening? It is happening because households are basically giving the firms factor inputs. They are giving their services, they are working there, they have given their land. So factor input is happening from households to firms. And firms, what they are doing or giving here is goods and services. So the dotted flow is the physical flow and solid flow is the money flow, we can say. Dotted flow is the real flow, physical flow. Physically people are working. Households, people belonging to households are working in the firms. So dotted line measures that, and dotted lines indicate that the households are providing factor inputs to the firms. And what physically the firms are giving to households? They are physically giving the goods and services to households. Really they are giving. But that is not money. That has nothing to do with money. By the way, let us say if there is no money, this all can be done with the barter system also. No problem. So this has nothing to do with money. But once there is money, this is measured in the form of money. Then how the money flow is happening? Households are spending, and that spending, what we call as consumption expenditure, is C, and that is the money they are giving to the firms. And what money firms are giving to households is in the form of factor payments, which the households receive as their income. So why is the income of the households? That is one thing you have to identify here very carefully. Why? That is income, that is national income also you can call it. And C is the consumption expenditure of households. Of course, naturally at a broader level, both will be equal. They will be equal. So what is the ultimate analogy that we can draw from a two-sector model is factor payments is equal to household income. That is equal to household expenditure. That is equal to the total receipts of the firms. That is equal to the value of output. All are equal. Whatever the output that the firms are producing, that is the ultimate value. That is the national income. And that is equal to the incomes earned by households, and that is equal to the factor payments done by the firms, and that is equal to the expenditure spent by households also. So whether you look at it from a production point of view or income point of view or expenditure point of view, ultimately all are same. All should be equal, and they are equal. So that is the assumption, or that is the conclusion we can draw in circular flow related to a two-sector model. This is an important aspect. All factor payments are equal to household incomes. Normally it will not happen. That is why it is an assumption. That is equal to household expenditure. Why household income is equal to household expenditure? Because they don't save. They don't save. So household income is equal to household expenditure. Normally, and that is equal to the total receipts of the firms, and that is equal to the value of output. Why is that also? Because there are no stocks, nothing, no saving. There will be entire amount of production of goods or services that has been consumed by the people in the same period, and no saving is there from the businesses also, no saving is there in the households also. No taxes are there, no imports, no exports. That is the key area of highlights in relation to two-sector model. That's a simple model as an assumption. Then when will the equilibrium output be achieved by a two-sector model? For that matter, any kind of model, any economy will have equilibrium output is a simple logic. Logically, if you understand, when demand is equal to supply. That's it now. Whatever the households wanted to consume, if exactly the same amount of goods or services are produced and rendered by the businesses, then done. That is the equilibrium output. So simply, in other words, for simple understanding, demand is equal to supply. Aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply, we can call it. Demand here is not about one individual demand, it is about the entire demand of all goods and services in the country as a whole. If that is equal to the aggregate supply, then we call it equilibrium output. So that has to be explained like this, if a question is asked on that. Equilibrium output occurs when the desired amount of output demanded. Desired amount of output demanded. Amount here, don't take it in money terms. Amount means the quantity or the requirement. Demanded by all the agents in the economy exactly equals to the amount produced in a given time period. So whatever is demanded is exactly the thing that is produced also in a given time period. If that happens, then we call that as equilibrium output. Practically, is it possible? Almost impossible. Exactly how can it match? But if it matches, that is what is equilibrium output. See, equilibrium as a concept in reality cannot exist at a point. It's only a theoretical assumption that there is something called equilibrium. But is that a useless assumption? No. Why? Because the world always tries to come to equilibrium. That is the basic nature of this. When you understand what is equilibrium, that does not mean we survive or we will be always in equilibrium. No, nobody will be there in equilibrium. But whenever we go somewhere left side of this, we will try to come back to this equilibrium. Whenever we go to the right side of this, again we will try to come back to this equilibrium. Actual movements keep on happening somewhere in between this. So whether how close we are to equilibrium really shows the success of that economy. That's a different story. But equilibrium as such cannot be expected at any particular point of time. It is only the market economy as a whole which always tries to reach equilibrium automatically. That's what market is all about. When demand is more than supply, or let us say aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply, then the producers will understand that there is a lot of demand, let us produce more, because the prices have already increased. Naturally, when the demand is more, prices slowly will increase. When the prices are increasing, the supply will try to tend to increase also. So what happens? Slowly supply also will match the demand and it comes to equilibrium. Will it really reach exactly equilibrium? No. We cannot actually find that point. So that's what happens if the aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. Simply businesses will tend to produce more and more because of that situation and bring back the supply almost equivalent to demand. On the contrary, reverse happens. Let us say supply is more than demand, then prices will go down. Producers will not produce. What they will do? They will keep on disposing the existing stocks. What are the stocks are there? Those only they will sell off. New production they will stop or pause, and for some time they will not produce more quantity of goods and services. So what happens because of that? Naturally, when the supply is already more than the demand, the prices were originally lower because market has reacted in such a way. When the supply is more than the demand, prices were lower. Then will it be like that only forever? No. It will change because the supply slowly gets reduced and supply and demand slowly tend to become equal. Will they exactly become equal? That should not be expected by us in reality, but theoretically if they become equal, that's what is equilibrium. So wherever there is a movement away from the equilibrium over a period of time, the market tends to come back to equilibrium, is what the market economists or the basic capitalism is all built on. That is how the market economy is considered to be a self-regulated and self-controlled economy, and the market itself will have its own movements so that ultimately they reach equilibrium. That is a conceptual point called equilibrium. But where are we applying it now? We are applying it for equilibrium output or equilibrium level of national income, we can say, where we are focused on national income. So at what equilibrium output there will be national income, that normally will be standard national income of a particular country. Sometimes it could be more, sometimes it could be less. But ultimately equilibrium output is what that a particular country can achieve, and that's what has been told by Keynes as equilibrium output, where desired amount of the output demanded is equal to the amount that is produced in a given period of time. So logically, when can we say that economy is in equilibrium? When the production plans of the firms and expenditure plans of the households, they are matching, when they are exactly the same, then we can say that economy is in equilibrium. When the production plans of the businesses and consumption plans or expenditure plans of the households are matching exactly, that's what is equilibrium output, we can say, according to Keynes. Then coming to the other aspects, these are all each of them a separate question, by the way. What is equilibrium output? What is the circular flow in a simple two-sector model? What are the key features of a two-sector model or assumptions in the two-sector model? Any of them. Each of them can be a question. I don't have to tell you every time, but you have to understand each of the slides is the answer for a question. Almost any of them can be asked as a 2 or 3 marks question. We should be able to explain them. So moving on to the next point, we have two things now here. We have to understand, when we say equilibrium output, we look at demand and production. So let us look at the demand first. Demand, which demand? Individual demand? No, that is aggregate demand. Aggregate demand means for the entire country, entire economy as a whole. That is the aggregate demand. So what is this aggregate demand function? What it will consist of? In a simple two-sector economy, very important point, this is a starting point which will be useful later also for the other models. So in a two-sector model, aggregate demand consists of only two components. One is aggregate demand for consumer goods, and second one is aggregate demand for investment goods. So put together, the demand for consumer goods and demand for investment goods is equal to the aggregate demand. And if you go back logically, what anybody can do, whether it is a person or a family or a country, with money, either they consume or they invest, that's all. Only two options. So the aggregate demand is nothing but consumption plus investment, or we can say the demand for consumer goods and demand for investment goods. That's what is aggregate demand function, we can say. And now, what is consumption function? So when we say aggregate demand is already equal to C plus I, then what is C? What is C? That is consumption function. Consumption, is it something that is completely autonomous? No, it cannot be, but a little bit of that is autonomous. But on what basis the consumption will be related, on what factors the consumption will be dependent upon. Generally, if you think logically also with common sense, income naturally. When you have more income, your consumption will be more. When you have less income, your consumption will be less. Simple logic. That's what has been told in consumption function. So what does the consumption function tell us? That tells us the positive relationship. Positive relationship means direct relationship. Between what? Between consumption, spending, that means expenditure, and disposable income. So we know that already in a two-sector model, Y is equal to YD. So whatever the income that Y is there, consumption is a function of that. Like what? Which function? Are we going to derive that function? No, sir, we cannot do that. That is beyond our scope. That is not possible. But what we are only trying to understand here is, it is definitely, the consumption is dependent upon disposable income. And how are these two related, consumption and income? Directly related. Positive relationship is there between them, which means when the disposable income is higher, consumption also will be higher, and vice versa. So this consumption function expresses the functional relationship between aggregate consumption expenditure and aggregate disposable income, which means relationship between C and Y. C is what? Aggregate consumption expenditure, and Y is disposable income. That is itself is YD also. And in a simple two-sector model, as we know, there are no taxes. Y is equal to YD. That doesn't matter. We don't have to bring that every time. That's already part of a two-sector model. So consumption function tells us the relationship between the aggregate consumption expenditure and aggregate disposable income. And we can express it mathematically as C is a function of Y. That's it. That is consumption function. How that function is related, that we have to see. Depends upon various types of actual research that happens in a particular economy, which is way beyond our understanding, way beyond our level of application. But our level will be only restricted to certain small linear equations which express the consumption function like this. So how this consumption and income relationship, consumption income relationship is called as consumption function. Definitely, as we know, C is a function of Y. In other words, we have to also understand the little mathematical points here. C is a dependent variable, Y is an independent variable. C is dependent on what? Y. So definitely C is dependent on Y, that is for sure. But how is it dependent? It could be dependent like this. C is equal to A plus BY. And if you observe this, it is a simple linear equation. A plus BY. In other words, Y equal to A plus BX type equation. So here, that is expressed in this way. C is equal to A plus BY. And you know it already should. A will be a constant, naturally. B also will be a constant. And that will be the slope of the line in any linear equation. B will be the slope of the line we are talking about. And Y is the independent variable. C is the dependent variable. Like that, any linear equation we should be able to interpret. So what are the each of the things representing here? C is the aggregate consumption expenditure. Y is the total or aggregate disposable income. A is a constant. A is a constant. So that is going to be there even though income is zero. Let us understand A very importantly. That can be a separate question also. Let us say Y is 0, means no income. But still C is equal to A. That means what? Irrespective of the income, there is going to be some consumption expenditure. For example, the basic things like food. A lot of times they will be required to be just spent irrespective of the income. So, such a type of expenditure which is autonomous, which is not dependent upon income, is called as A. That is a constant. And that denotes, of course, it is a positive thing, plus only, not minus. There cannot be a negative consumption. You can consume 2 kilos of rice. You cannot consume minus 2 kilos of rice. That is just impossible. So it will be definitely a positive value of consumption, but when at zero level of disposable income. If disposable income is zero also, still there will be a consumption equivalent to A. That is one constant. Then B is what? Naturally, that will be the slope of this line always. That is the slope of this function. And how that can be calculated? That is calculated like this. Delta C divided by delta Y. Delta C means change in the consumption. Delta Y means change in the income. In other words, how the change in consumption is going to be when it is compared with the change in income. And that is what is called as, very important technical term, marginal propensity to consume. That is marginal propensity to consume, calculated as delta C divided by delta Y. And what does it mean? That is, simply speaking, the increase in consumption per unit increase in disposable income. If income increased by, let us say, 5% and consumption increased by, let us say, 4%, let us say, then how much will be the marginal propensity to consume? That will be 0.8. So that is what this marginal propensity to consume will tell us. How much increase in consumption is going to happen when compared with an increase in disposable income. So just for example, as we have taken, if the income increases, we are talking aggregate. Don't look at micro things. Micro things at a family level, household level, personal level, we can use only for examples, for understanding purposes. But these all theories we are looking at are macro level. In the entire country, the total income has increased by 5%, let us say. And consumption has increased by only 4%, let us say. That means the marginal propensity to consume is 0.8. Like that. That's what B will tell us. So, we cannot directly calculate B. In order to calculate B, we need this change in the consumption and change in income. Let us say original consumption and original income is given. New consumption and new income is given. Can we calculate B? Yes. How? That is delta C, that is change in consumption, numerator, delta Y, that is change in income in the denominator. So delta C divided by delta Y will give us B. That is the slope of this consumption function, and that is also called as marginal propensity to consume. Very, very important concept. A is autonomous expenditure, B is marginal propensity to consume. Consumption function can be expressed in a linear fashion like C is equal to A plus BY. And that can be expressed in graphical form also like this. And as you can see, A, consumption started not from 0. Consumption started here. Why? Even though the income is 0, there is still this much consumption which is done by the entire country. That is bare minimum consumption, one way we can say. Autonomous expenditure we can call it also. So that is not dependent upon income. That means simply A is that level of consumption which will be there even though there is no disposable income. Even though the disposable income is 0, how much of our consumption actually happens, that is called A. That is A. And B, as you can see, is the slope of this function, that is consumption function as a function of Y, and that slope is B. That's all. That is the linear equation and straight line which is depicting the consumption function. And naturally, you can observe the slope is positive. Why positive? Because the consumption is positively related to the income. When the income increases, consumption also increases. And I know some of you are bringing your foundation level things into here. Maybe there is an exception also, right? Maybe sometimes income increases but still consumption might fall also now. Something like inferior goods like that. Don't try to mix it. That was microeconomics. We were looking at individual products, households, organizations, firms, etc. Here we are not looking at any individual item. We are talking aggregate consumption, aggregate income. Definitely they are positively related always. No exceptions. We cannot bring individual items. There may be thousands of items that are produced and consumed by a country. In some of them there may be a positive relationship between income and consumption. In some of them, there may be a negative relationship between income and consumption. We are not looking at them. individually at micro level. That's the main point we have to keep in mind while understanding and studying EFF. Never try to bring the microeconomic concepts here and get confused unnecessarily. Yes, that was different. That was at a smaller level earlier. At a product level, at a particular type of situation or a particular type of a consumer behavior, those things were all discussed in foundation economics. That was different. That was microeconomics. Clearly, that is distinguished from macroeconomics. Here, we are not talking about any one product, one service, or one individual, or one household, or one firm. We are talking about country as a whole. Entire economy as a whole we are looking at. In that sense, aggregate consumption expenditure of a country will be positively related to the aggregate income or aggregate, you can say the factor incomes of all the households put together. In this case, because of two-sector model only. So definitely there is a positive relationship between consumption and income. That's what is expressed in this consumption function line. C is equal to A plus by. A and B both are positive. A is autonomous of y, B is the slope of this line, and B we can also call it as marginal propensity to consume. Propensity means tendency, how much consumption is happening. That is explained in little detailed manner in this slide. This is a very important question, quite possible to be asked, and even calculations also can be asked in numerical questions. What is this marginal propensity to consume? Already we have just observed. The consumption function is based on the assumption that there is a constant relationship between the consumption and income, as denoted by the constant B, which is that marginal propensity to consume. That is the actual relationship that it is establishing between the consumption and income. And the concept of marginal propensity to consume describes the relationship between change in the consumption, that is delta C, and change in income, that is delta Y. That's what we were looking at. And what is the value of this increment to the consumer expenditure per each unit increment to income is termed as marginal propensity to consume. These are all the things you have to write exactly, not stories. And understanding wise, it's okay. One formula is enough to understand. Delta C divided by delta Y. Change in the consumption, change in the consumer expenditure divided by change in the income. Simple. That is called marginal propensity to consume. So how much increment will happen to consumer expenditure for each unit increment to the income is termed as marginal propensity to consume, and that is denoted by B in the consumption function of C is equal to A plus BY. That is MPC, we can call marginal propensity to consume. Though it has nothing to do directly with this function, because the topic of marginal has come, average propensity to consume also can be calculated from the data that is available. So what is average? See, marginal means always 1 plus. For every additional unit of income, how much additional consumer expenditure is getting added. That's what marginal propensity to consume will tell us. Marginal is always 1 plus. What is average? Average is total divided by number of units. So, just like marginal propensity to consume, average propensity to consume also is a ratio. Yes, but is it exactly the same? No. This ratio also defines the income consumption relationship. Yes. But what ratio of what? Ratio of total consumption to total income. That is called as average propensity to consume. That is APC. C divided by Y is the formula for that. Total consumption divided by total income. What is MPC? Delta C divided by delta Y. What is APC? Total consumption C divided by total income Y. That is called average propensity to consume. Generally, that will tell us what is the average propensity, what is the average tendency of consumption in a particular economy. But marginal propensity to consume is a more important thing as compared with average propensity to consume. But as far as exams are concerned, anything can be asked for calculation purposes. Conceptually, marginal propensity to consume is more important because it is a part of the equation itself, right? So naturally, that will be more useful even in solving many questions. Average propensity to consume, just total by total, we can just calculate directly. So let us look at this table for understanding purposes. Various incomes are given here in this column, and consumption is given according to this column. So income is 0, but still consumption is 500, let us say. What does it mean? This is A, naturally. A is what? That level of consumption even with 0 income. That is A, right? So A is there. That is the 500 units or whatever it is, we can say. Then average propensity to consume, can we calculate? No, we cannot, because 500 by 0, anything divided by 0, we cannot actually define it, so it is infinity. Marginal propensity to consume doesn't make sense because it is the first thing only. 1 plus if you add income, then only you can understand. So here we cannot calculate any of these things, so it doesn't matter. Now let us increase this income. Let us say the income has increased from 0 to 1000. Then the consumption increased from 500 to 1250. So first of all, average propensity to consume, how will you get? Total by total. 1250 divided by 1000, that is 1.25. Like that, average propensity can be calculated for other things also. 2000 by 2000, it is 1. Like that, it is 0.92, then 0.83, then 0.8. So if you observe, the average propensity to consume is going downwards. So for every additional income that is being added, the average propensity to consume is not increasing, it is diminishing. That is one thing that we can just observe here. It doesn't have much of relevance for our understanding of this concept, but yes, that is clear, evident from the column of average propensity to consume. How we calculated it? Total consumption divided by total income. That's it. But look at marginal propensity to consume, which is nothing but B. So this is B, marginal propensity to consume. How it is calculated? Delta C divided by delta Y. So from 500 to 1250 means 750 divided by 1000. That is 0.75. 1250 to 2000 means another 750 divided by 1000, 0.75. Again to 750, again 750. Or difference here is 2750 to 5000, difference is, I think this calculation is wrong. Here 750 is okay up to here. Then later, what is the difference? Change in consumption, 5000 minus 2750, that is 2250 divided by 3000. This calculation is wrong, but answer is correct. So 2250 divided by 3000, that is 0.75 only. That is still the same. Then 5 to 8 means 3000 by 6 to 10 means 4000, still 0.75. But what is the observation that we can say? Marginal propensity to consume is a constant. That is why it is B, no? B has to be constant. A and B have to be constants. Then only the equation works. So what is the equation that we can draw from this table? What is the equation? C is equal to 500 plus 0.75y. That is the relationship between consumption and income. Are you thinking that it is going to be the same case for every time? No, it is only just an example. In this example, that is the equation we can draw as a relationship between the income and consumption. What is the relationship? C is equal to 500 plus 0.75y. 0.75 is the slope of that line. B, that is what is marginal propensity to consume. Now that the marginal propensity to consume is calculated, we can also introduce one more term here, that is marginal propensity to save. Marginal propensity to save. How can you get that? It is nothing but 1 minus marginal propensity to consume. So when marginal propensity to consume is 0.75, marginal propensity to save will be how much? 0.25. 1 minus 0.75, that is 0.25. That is marginal propensity to save. MPS we can call it. How to calculate that? Change in the saving divided by change in income. Here change in consumption divided by change in income. So that is marginal propensity to consume, delta C by delta Y. Marginal propensity to save can be easily calculated by taking 1 minus marginal propensity to consume, or even it can be calculated by taking delta S by delta Y. So saving also can have a separate column if you want. So what was the saving in zero income? When income is not there, what saving will be there? Nothing will be there. No? What about here? In the case of income of 200,000 and a consumption of 1250 is there. What is the saving here? There is no saving, but negative 250 is there. But here, instead of taking anything about sign, we can take just numbers. So 250 divided by 1000 will be 0.25. Here, next case, the saving is not there. There also the marginal propensity to save is 0.25. But if you look at the changes that are happening in the saving, that can be taken. For example, in zero income, if you take 500, income was 0, saving was minus 500. From there it started. From minus 500, if it became minus 250, if at all saving has to be calculated also, here it is minus 500 saving. What is the difference between minus 500 and minus 250? 250 divided by change in income is 1000, that is 0.25. So minus 250 to saving became 0. Difference is 250 still. So 250 by 1000, 0.25. Then here the saving became 250. 250 by 1000, 0.25. Here the saving became 1000, right? 1000 is the saving here. Yeah. And from 250 to 1000, 750. So 750 divided by 3000, that is 0.25. Again, here the saving became 2000. When you are having income of 10,000 and consumption of 8,000, saving is 2,000. So saving became 2,000 and change in saving is 1,000 divided by change in income is 4,000, 0.25. So like that, change in the saving divided by change in income also can be calculated as marginal propensity to saving. But in general, that is not required, but we should be able to calculate even in that way if such question is asked. But otherwise, how it can be calculated? Simply by taking 1 minus marginal propensity to consume. That gives us MPS. In this example, it is 0.25 because MPC was 0.75 and consumption function was C is equal to 500 plus 0.75Y. That is consumption function in a nutshell. Now moving to the saving function. What is this saving function? Saving function is nothing but that shows the level of saving at each level of disposable income. So that shows the level of savings, yes, we can call it, at each level of disposable income. And we know this already. What is the national income? Naturally, it should be Y should be equal to C plus S. Either consumption or saving will be there, which shows that disposable income is consumption plus saving. So Y is equal to C plus S means consumption plus saving. So naturally, if you take the other side, S is equal to Y minus C. That is called as saving function. So saving function is nothing but Y minus C. By the way, we are introducing this saving also as a part of the tendency. Of course, as far as the assumption in relation to the Keynesian two-sector model is concerned, there is no saving. But reality is that there will be saving. So that is why in the Keynesian model, where we had a two-sector economy, in that two-sector economy, the aggregate demand is equal to only two things: consumption plus investment, or demand for consumer goods and demand for investment goods. And now we are looking at the other side of it, that is equal to C plus S, that is consumption once again plus saving. So here Y is equal to C plus S and S is equal to Y minus C. Separately, there is no saving other than this. Don't think that saving is coming from somewhere else. No, it is part of the income only. Some portion of the income is consumed, some portion of the income is saved. But how is it saved? As an investment. Saved does not mean it has been just kept somewhere idle. No, it is not idle saving. Of course, it will be equal to investment. We will see that equilibrium under two-sector model now. But prior to that, this question of marginal propensity to save also can be asked. Let us quickly go through that. Naturally, what will be the marginal propensity to save? Anything that is marginal is always the slope of that line. So we are talking about save means the slope of the saving function is called nothing but marginal propensity to save. And simply, if 1 unit, always marginal is 1 unit, 1 unit increase in the disposable income leads to an increase in B units of consumption, then 1 minus B is the increase in saving naturally. So if 1 unit of income has increased B units in the consumption, then 1 minus B is nothing but increase in saving. So B we call it consumption, and as a expression that is marginal, propensity to consume, and 1 minus B is nothing but marginal propensity to save. That's it. And this increment to saving per each unit increase in the disposable income, what we call as marginal propensity to save, and that's what we observed in the table also earlier in the last column. That is marginal propensity to save, that is delta S divided by delta Y, and delta S divided by delta Y we can also call it as 1 minus B. That is marginal propensity to save. In other words, the marginal propensity to save is nothing but increase in saving per unit increase in the disposable income. For every increase in the disposable income, how much increase in saving is happening. That's what we calculated also in that table as marginal propensity to save, delta S, change in saving, divided by delta Y, change in income. And that is 1 minus B. So that is the explanation for marginal propensity to save, which is nothing but a complement of marginal propensity to consume. If marginal propensity to consume is, let us say, 0.8, marginal propensity to save will be 0.2, because it is always 1 minus marginal propensity to consume. Now that the marginal thing has come, let us look at average also. Average is nothing but total by total. Total of what? Because we are looking at average propensity to save. So just like marginal propensity to save, the average propensity to save also is a ratio defining what? Income and saving relationship. But is it per unit income? For every unit increase in the income, how much the saving is changing? Is that what we are looking at? No. It is not a unit change in income. It is a total change in the savings as a result of total change in the income. Total saving divided by total income is what we call as average propensity to save. So simply speaking, it is that portion of the total income which is saved. Percentage of total income in which how much is saved, that can be called as average propensity to save. That can be found out like this: S divided by Y. S is total savings, Y is total income. Even we can calculate that in this table earlier. Total S by total Y. So in the first case, of course, there is nothing. There is no saving at all. That is minus 500. So minus 500 divided by 0 also is undefinable. That's okay. Starting from the second case onwards, what was the saving there? There was no saving. Actually, it was also minus 250 it was. So minus 250 divided by total income 1000 means minus 0.25. So in other words, income of that person is 1 rupee. His saving is not there, because for 1 rupee he is spending 1.25 rupees. That was he was consuming 1.25 rupees. That was already their average propensity to consume. That means 0.25 is negative saving, that is. So that is minus 0.25 in that case. What about the next case? Saving was 0. So naturally, average propensity to save also will be 0. 0 divided by anything is 0. Then comes the other things. Then 250 was the saving, right? So 250 divided by 3000 total income, you can say 0.083. 0.083 was the average propensity to save, average. So total saving divided by total income is the formula. So 250 divided by 3000, that is 0.083. Same way, 1000 divided by 6000, next level, 0.167. That will be the average propensity to save. 0.17 we can say. Then 2000 divided by 10,000, that will be 0.2. But if you observe, simply you can understand from average propensity to consume and average propensity to save also. 1 rupee income is there for anybody. How much is consuming if you see? Remaining you will save only, na? Naturally. So 1 rupee income, 1.25 if he is consuming, there is a negative 0.25 saving. If 1 rupee income is there, 1 rupee consumed, 0 saving. 1 rupee income is there, 0.92 is consumed, means 0.08 saving. 1 rupee income is there, 0.83 consumed, means 0.17 saving. And 0.80 if it is consumed, means 0.2 saving. That is almost, once again you can say, average propensity to consume and average propensity to save are also related like that. We can say average propensity to save can be found out like what? 1 minus average propensity to consume, no problem. It can be found out same way. So 1 minus marginal propensity to consume will give us marginal propensity to save. 1 minus average propensity to consume will give us average propensity to save. That gives us the percentage of total income which is saved. In that example, that was last case 20% we can say. So total saving divided by total income is nothing but average propensity to save. And all these things can be explained here in this graph, which consists of two items. Of course, I would suggest not to focus much on the bottom graph because it is only savings function. Only for understanding purposes I am looking at this. Now, afterwards, we will not focus on the saving function much. We will focus more on the basic national income determination and consumption function, particularly in different models also later. So look at this situation here. Consumption function and saving function are there. And naturally, consumption starts from not zero. It doesn't start from zero, right? It starts from somewhere, A. And that is C. That is basically A is there, which is autonomous. It is not related to income. And there is income actually, which is nothing but C plus S. That is starting from here. And this line is what we are looking at as national income line. That is the Y. Y here is C plus S, consumption plus saving. So that is starting from the zero. And this line is a 45-degree line. According to Keynes, it will be a 45-degree line. So this Y is equal to C plus S is the national income line, we can say. And where this consumption is just cutting here with this line at this point. That is Y1, right? And at this point, the consumption is equivalent to income. That means you have a 1 rupee with you and you spent 1 rupee only. Prior to that point, what happened? There was dissaving. As we can see in the earlier example, there was a negative saving also. That was called dissaving. Afterwards, this point, there is saving. That is positive saving. So simply imagine if there is 1 rupee income that you have, in that 0.8 rupees only you have consumed, means 0.2 rupees of saving is there. That is indicated by this zone. And if 1 rupee income is there but you have spent 1.3 rupees, that means there is a negative saving, or you can call it a dis-saving. That is indicated by this region. But where it will be exactly matching? When the consumption is equivalent to income. When C is equal to Y, that is where the consumption and income are equal. No saving, that means zero saving, you can say. Afterwards, there will be a positive saving. Prior to that, we call it dis-saving. And if you take only this saving line, that line will be like this. So dis-saving will be here. Below, when the saving function is cutting this x-axis, and below this, negative saving is there. Above that, saving function has positive value. That means there is saving afterwards. So when consumption is equal to income, that is where no saving is there. That is when the S is 0. That's what we can understand from this particular graph of consumption function and saving function in one diagram. Then another question is a very important one. What is autonomous expenditure? Simply A is autonomous expenditure, but you have to write explanation. You cannot say A is autonomous expenditure. So what is A? That is expenditure which do not vary with the level of income. Those are called autonomous expenditures. So they are determined by the factors other than income. They are not dependent on income. They do not vary with the level of income. They are depending upon the factors which are not income, other than income. Like what? Could be business expectations and economic policy. As an example, we can write. So autonomous expenditure is that expenditure which is determined by the factors other than income. They are not going to vary with the level of income. They are not dependent. They are not affected directly by the level of income. They are autonomous. They are independent. That is why we are calling them as autonomous expenditures. Maybe on what type of factors they may be dependent, like business expectations, economic policy, conducive environment, or otherwise. Those things are called autonomous expenditures which do not vary with the level of income. Now, coming to the real climax of two-sector model, which is definitely equating both the things that we have learned so far. On one side, we have this aggregate demand function, which we already looked at as C plus I, and aggregate supply is equivalent to C plus S. And naturally, when we say if an economy has to be at an equilibrium means what? These two should be equal. That is where the equilibrium level of national income will be there according to the Keynesian theory. So, according to this theory of income determination, the equilibrium level of national income is a situation in which aggregate demand C plus I is equal to C plus S. If you look at like this, C plus I is equal to C plus S. So, naturally, C getting cancelled. Ultimately, what? I is equal to S. In other words, savings is equal to investment. That is why there is no net saving. Investment is there. That is from the saving, other than that income portion which has been consumed. So in the income, certain portion is consumed and certain portion is saved. And that entire saving is considered to be investment in a two-sector model. So that is where we can equate these two things. C plus I is equal to C plus S. Naturally, I is equal to S. And we know what is aggregate demand and aggregate supply. What is aggregate demand? That is the household's plans to consume and save. That is aggregate demand. And aggregate supply depends on what? The producer's plan to produce the goods and services. On one side, households will plan to consume and save. And on the other side, producers plan to produce goods and services. So that is what aggregate demand and aggregate supply is all about. And at equilibrium, for a two-sector model, these two should be equal. And for the aggregate demand and aggregate supply to be equal, so that the equilibrium is established, naturally what should be same? Households plans, whatever the households plans are there, they must coincide with the producer's plans. Both are thinking in the same way. So whatever the households want, that only exactly the producers will produce and give them. So both the plans of households and producers will match at where? At equilibrium. Once again, is it possible? Exactly will it happen? No. But that is how the market moves from one side to another side, so that it tries to reach equilibrium always. Equilibrium is that level where aggregate demand is equivalent to aggregate supply. In expression wise mathematically, as an equation, C plus I is equal to C plus S. In other words, I is equal to S. That is the two-sector model of national income determination and equilibrium income, we can say. That can be depicted in this diagram, where C plus I is there and C plus S are also there. But for just general understanding, C is also there. If you see, C already we have looked at. This C and C plus S we have looked at earlier. Now C is starting from here. So what is this? This is A, autonomous expenditure. We know all this. But C plus I naturally will be more than C, no? I is investment. So it is more than C. So there is a constant distance between C and I. C and C plus I. That is I. So this distance, this difference between C and C plus I is nothing but I. So for some time forget about C. That is not what we are interested in. That was important when we looked at the consumption function and saving function. That was different. That already we have discussed. And when the saving happens, when the dissaving happens, that we already looked at. Now look at C plus I and C plus S. These two are the lines that we want. And C plus S, as we know already, is always this 45 degrees line. That is C plus S. But now where the equilibrium will happen, it will happen when C plus I is equal to C plus S. Okay. So for earlier purposes, this was dissaving, this was saving. That is what now, that is not what we are looking at now. Now we are looking at where C plus I is equivalent to C plus S. That is the equilibrium income under Keynes two-sector model. So that can be depicted as point E, and that income can be called as Y0 only for understanding purposes. So will it be there always? No, sir, it will not be. There will be a phase where C plus I is less than or greater than C plus S. Look at this, C plus I is greater than C plus S in this case, where the income is lower than original income, or C plus I is less than C plus S, then the national income is more than equilibrium income. What happens in those cases? So simply speaking, when we say E point is there, that is equilibrium. That is where the aggregate demand and aggregate supply are equal. Let us look at point A. Aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply. So what happens at that level in this case? Aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply. What happens? Naturally, the prices will go up. and existing stocks are not enough to cater the demand, and the producers start producing more. Already the income was lesser there at Y1. When the producers start producing more and give more and more goods and services to the people, naturally what happens to the national income? That goes up from Y1 to Y0. So in that phase, the national income will go up. It will be an upward stage. Popularly, normally a growth stage, we can say, of many economies, where aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. It is a good phase actually. Not that already having a lower income of Y1 is good. Moving from Y1 to Y0 is good. That is when economy growing and all, we can say. There will be phases where otherwise than this also. That cases what happens? Aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply. That is actually unfortunately something that we are looking at now in India also, where the aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply. That means national income is there now. Is it going up or down? It is going down now. Why? From Y2, it is going back, trying to go back to equilibrium. Always it tries. If any situation is there where it is not equilibrium, markets behave and they tend to try to go to equilibrium. So when aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply, then existing stocks are too much. There is nothing to produce more. What is there to produce? Already so much stocks are there and demand is not there. People are not buying. Stocks are there. You can see so many cars lying in the showrooms and godowns. Nobody is buying them. So what happens? Will the car manufacturers continue to manufacture? No, they will not. What they will do then? They will lay off some of the workers. So income reduced again. And production stopped again. Production reduced again. So naturally the national income overall level, what you call GDP, whatever the name you call it, that reduces. So movement starts from Y2 to Y0. That is when the aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply. Of course, that is a phase of contraction, we can say, when the national income will tend to reduce. Ideally, it should not be, no country should be in that phase. But if it is there, market will definitely take its own course, wherein it will reduce the national income over a period of time and tries to reach to equilibrium once again. Always that is the way the market behaves. Market is like a pendulum. Market in the sense we are talking about the entire economy as a whole, entire country as a whole. So if this is the situation, which is okay type of situation, because at least there is a possibility of growth from this phase to equilibrium. If this is the phase, it is not a good phase because that will lead to a reduction in the GDP, reduction in the income from Y2 to Y0. So that is how the national income will be calculated and determined in a two-sector model. Two-sector model, national income is nothing but C plus I or C plus S. Both are equal at equilibrium. That is national income. But if C plus I is greater than C plus S, then the national income tends to go up from that position. And if C plus I is less than C plus S, the national income tends to go down from that position. Always the direction will be towards equilibrium. That is how the national income behaves. But ultimate objective is where aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. Ideally, yes. But practically not possible. It will never be exactly equal. But if it is equal, that is what we call as equilibrium income. That is why not in this example. So what is equilibrium? Simply where aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. In other words, C plus I is equal to C plus S. In other words, I is equal to S. Simple. That's what we are looking at once again. Same things repeated. Equality between the saving and investment can be seen directly from the identities in the national income accounting. Why is that? Because income is either spent or saved. There is only two options. Y is equal to C plus S. We know that. And without government and foreign trade, aggregate demand is equal to what? Consumption plus investment. We have looked at the aggregate demand function earlier already. Y is equal to C plus I. And when we equate both of them, C plus I is equal to C plus S. In other words, S is equal to I. Savings is equal to investment. So aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. That is how two-sector model can be understood, even with some mathematical formula. Now let us apply this in some of the numerical examples for general understanding purposes. Let us say the empirical consumption function C is given as 100 plus 0.75y and I is equal to 1000. Okay. Calculate equilibrium level of national income. What would be the consumption expenditure at equilibrium level of national income? 2 marks question. Very much possible like this. Questions can be asked. All that we need to do is we have to substitute. Well, we have to substitute. So what is national income? National income is C plus I, right? So when you say national income, Y is equal to C plus I. And what is C? That is given 100 plus 0.75 Y. Substitute that. It is given already. C is nothing but 100 plus 0.75 Y. Plus I is equal to 1000. That is also already given. Simply all that you need to do is how much is Y. So 0.25 Y is equal to 1100. Then how much is Y? It will be naturally 4400. Done. That is why equilibrium level of national income. Answer for first question is 4400. How did we get it? Just substituting the formula. Y is equal to C plus I is the formula which we know already. That is the national income. And substitute C here because it is given. C is 100 plus 0.75 Y. Substitute in the place of C that one. I is given as 1000 already. Substitute that. You get Y is equal to 4400. That is the national income. Then the question is not over. That gives only 1 mark. Another mark comes from the second question. What would be the consumption expenditure at equilibrium level of national income? So equilibrium level of national income is there. In that, how much will be the consumption expenditure he is telling. See, when you know Y already 4400, simply C you can just substitute, na? 100 plus 0.75 into Y. Y on how much already we know. That is 4400. So how much is going to be the consumption expenditure at that level? 4400 into 0.75 plus 100. That means 3400 is the consumption at that level. That's it. That is the answer for second question. Simple substitution and basic arithmetic algebraic calculations are required for solving such type of questions. Now let us take another example. Suppose the consumption of an economy is given by C is equal to 20 plus 0.6y and investment function is given as I is equal to 10 plus 0.2y. What will be the equilibrium level of national income? That is the question. So look at this carefully. So Y is equal to, once again same, C plus I, right? Substitute. C is how much? 20 plus 0.6y plus I is how much? I is not given as a number. That is also dependent upon income. Let it be, no problem. Just substitute it. 10 plus 0.2y. That's all. You can solve for y. So y 0.2y is equal to, you can say 30. Y is how much? 30 divided by 0.2. That is 150. That is the answer. Substitution. That is the equilibrium level of national income. Y is 150. Just for understanding purposes, will there be 150 rupees or $150 national income for any country? We will talk there billions, trillions and all that. Only for understanding. We don't have to deal with the calculations of trillions here. We just need to understand the concept of it. So y is equal to C plus I, we know that. That is equal to C substitute according to the equation given, I substitute according to the equation given. Then solve for y. Simply you get y is equal to 150 as answer for that numerical example. Another example is given. Suppose the consumption function of an economy is C is equal to 0.8y directly. That means there is no autonomous consumption at all. Possible. A is 0. That's okay. Let it be there. What we can do. That is the consumption function given. C is 0.8y. Planned investment by entrepreneurs for a year is 500 crores. I, that is investment. Find out what will be the equilibrium level of income. Once again same. Nothing special. What will be the equilibrium level of income? Y is equal to C plus I. Once again same. C is how much? 0.8y in this case. Plus I, how much they are telling investment? That is 500 crores. At least some number is given here. 500 crores. So what does it mean? 0.2y is equal to 500. Which means how much should be y? 5 times of that. That means 2500 crores. Simple. So 2500 crores of income if it is there for a country, in that how much the country will consume 80% of that, which means 2000 crores. Remaining 500 crores will be invested in a two-sector model only, because nothing else is given. When nothing else is there, you have to understand it is two-sector model. If taxes are there, government is there, imports, exports are there, then those are different models. So these are the applicational aspects of two-sector model of national income determination. And the change in the income, autonomous income, when the C plus I increases, naturally what happens? Then the national income also increases. If original C plus I is this much, if there is a increase in the investment, and because of that what happens, there is increase in the overall income also from Y0 to Y1. Now the concept of investment multiplier comes, because when investment here originally was I, consumption C was there always anyway, plus C plus I was this line. So what was the original equilibrium? Y0. This was the original equilibrium. Now what happened? Let us say there is an investment increase, delta I, that is increased by how much? This much. It is increased by only this much. Okay, this is delta I, right? Now what happened to national income equilibrium? Because of that increase, the equilibrium income has changed, increased actually from Y0 to Y1. Y0 to Y1 it has increased. Of course, this original line of Y is equal to C plus S is same. But where this new line of C plus I plus delta I is cutting it at the place of E1, that is a new equilibrium we can call it. At that new equilibrium, what is the national income now? Y1. Is it lower than earlier national income? No, it is higher than earlier national income. It has increased. So now the point is, delta I is only this much. Investment increased only this much. But look at the income, how much it increased? Too much. So this distance is lesser. This distance is higher. Why that happens? What is that magic? That magic is called as investment multiplier. That is investment multiplier. This refers a very, very important concept and important question also. This investment multiplier means it is a phenomena whereby there is a change in the injection of expenditure will lead to a proportionate change, which is not exactly same proportion, a proportionately larger change or a multiple change in level of national income. That means for a smaller increase in the expenditure, there is a bigger increase in the national income. That's what is investment multiplier. And what multiplier explains us is how many times the aggregate income increases as a result of increase in investment, simply speaking. That is why we call it as investment multiplier. Imagine if 100 crores of investment is done into a particular economy, national income will also increase by 100 crores. No, it will not. It will increase by, let us say, 300 crores. Then what is investment multiplier? 3 times. So by how many times the aggregate income increases as a result of an increase in investment is called as investment multiplier. And that is a multiplier effect, which is always important for understanding macroeconomics, and particularly any economy where the investments are increasing by some amount. The income will not increase by the same percentage. It will increase by leaps and bounds. It will increase by much more than 1. And if that is the case, then investment multiplier is there working. Higher the investment multiplier, good for the country. With lesser investment only, they can earn more national income. So that is investment multiplier concept, which is nothing but how many times the aggregate income increases as a result of increase in investment. In other words, how can we express it mathematically? K, we can call it investment multiplier as a denotation. Delta Y divided by delta I. Delta Y means change in income, that is national income, divided by delta I means change in investment. If change in investment was 100 crores, in our example, change in national income was 300 crores, investment multiplier was 3. So change in income divided by change in investment is what is investment multiplier. Very, very important question and concept. So delta Y by delta I, how that can also be calculated is like this. That is 1 divided by 1 minus MPC. In other words, 1 by 1 minus B. And 1 minus B we know already. What is that? That is marginal propensity to save. So 1 divided by marginal propensity to save is investment multiplier. And from that we can even understand the concept of it. Imagine if the marginal propensity to save is lesser, then investment multiplier will be higher. If the marginal propensity to save is higher, then investment multiplier will be lesser. These two are inversely related to each other. And since marginal propensity to save itself is a complement of marginal propensity to consume, for a higher marginal propensity to consume, automatically the marginal propensity to save will be lesser and investment multiplier will be higher. That means more and more people consume in an economy, the economy circle will run number of times. And when that runs a number of times, investment multiplier effect will happen. Though with a lesser amount of investment in a particular period, overall increase in the income will be much higher. That is the concept of investment multiplier. Depending upon the marginal propensity to consume, naturally also marginal propensity to save. How to calculate investment multiplier is 1 divided by 1 minus marginal propensity to consume, or 1 divided by marginal propensity to save. That is another way of calculating investment multiplier. But basically what is it? Delta Y divided by delta I. Change in the national income divided by change in the investment. That is investment multiplier. Very crucial concept, whether it is 2 sector, 3 sector, 4 sector or 44 sectors. Investment multiplier concept is same, that is common for all. Whether it will addition of another sector will increase the multiplier or decrease the multiplier, that's a different story. Whether government will act in such a way that it is improving the multiplier or not, that is a different story. But definitely investment multiplier concept is applicable for all sectors, all models, whether it is a 2 sector model or 3 sector model or even the 4 sector model. We will look at that again even when we discuss those models. But right now, for a 2 sector model, it is very simple. It is simply 1 by 1 minus b, enough. That is investment multiplier for understanding purposes. Then let us understand the concept of leakages also. Leakages means what? Which reduce the investment multiplier. Means what? When these leakages occur in an economy, they will reduce the investment multiplier. What are those kind of leakages? That can be also asked as a separate question. Normally, the increase in income due to increase in investment does not go on endlessly. It will not happen like that always. Endlessly it will not happen. So let us say we have increased some investment. Yes, it has resulted in increase in overall national income. But again, if you increase investment, will it result in the same increase in national income? Maybe not. Maybe not. Because there might be a possible leakages, and this process of additional income propagation slows down and ultimately comes to a halt. What are the causes responsible for such a decline in income are called as leakages. Those are the leakages in the economy. What is the effect of those leakages? Simply, they will reduce investment multiplier effect. That's it. And income that is not spent on the currently produced goods and services may be regarded as having leaked out of income stream. So whatever the income that is not spent on the currently produced goods and services, we can say that is all leaked out of the income stream. It is not adding to the overall national income because it has not been spent for consuming the currently produced goods and services. That is one of the major factors for leakages. And when these leakages are powerful, more and more powerful, naturally what happens? They will have a negative impact on the multiplier. So what happens? When the leakages are powerful, multiplier value will become smaller and smaller. Ideally, what the government's job is, once again, at a top level, will be to try to reduce these leakages. Whether they do it or not is a different story. Theoretically, at least, leakages have to be controlled. They have to be monitored. They should not be left to increase. Why? Because they have a negative impact on the multiplier effect. The multiplier effect is a fantastic thing if any government and any economy can use its fullest extent. If the highest multiplier is there, that is the best thing that we can expect from any particular economy, which means there is a possibility of a lesser investment also that will cause a higher increase in the national income. What else you want? That means you are, for understanding purposes, not really that, but for understanding purposes, return on investment is high, no? So you are investing less and the benefit of that you are getting is much higher. So that is a good thing when having higher investment multiplier. But what causes those investment multiplier to become smaller? Those leakages will cause investment multiplier to be smaller, and those causes which are responsible for such decline in income after some period are called leakages. And what are the possible causes for leakages? This can be a question also. One of the very important possible causes for leakages is progressive rates of taxation. Of course, when we are looking at leakages, we are not only talking about a two-sector model. This can be there in any sector. When we are looking at investment multiplier and leakages, these two concepts are there in every sector. And the conceptual things are applied everywhere. Let us say marginal propensity to consume. Is it restricted to only two-sector model? No, it is not. Only in two-sector model, what happens? C plus S is equal to C plus I. That's all. That only is the point to be noted in a two-sector model. That does not mean all the concepts are only applicable to two-sector model. Not at all. Each of them, what we are looking at in two-sector model, cumulatively will be already there in three-sector also. Two-sector is a subset of three-sector only. So all the things will again be there. Same way they will be also applied, and same way they will be useful in other models as well. So don't look at these concepts as restricted points about only two-sector model. Particularly investment multiplier and leakages are broader concepts. They are applicable to every sector and every type of model that Keynes has proposed. So here, when we are looking at leakages, we are not looking at two-sector model. General concept of leakages we are looking at. Same way we are not looking at investment multiplier only in a two-sector model. Only that is also a general concept that we are looking at here, which will apply again also later in other models that we will do later. But right now, what could be the possible causes for leakages? First and foremost possible cause is progressive rates of taxation. When the people are having higher taxes to be paid for their incomes, that means they are not spending enough. That money, what is their disposable income is getting reduced. When the disposable income is getting reduced because of higher taxes that they are paying, then that disposable income cannot be spent in the economy. In other words, current consumption or currently produced goods and services are not being consumed because of that. But yes, there can be a counter argument for that, because government also, whatever that money collects, it is not going to eat up, it is going to spend. So whether people spend or government spend, ultimately economy has no difference. So yes, leakages are caused by higher rates of income tax. That argument is there, but a counter argument also can be there. It doesn't matter ultimately when ultimately the expenditure is spent by government also, because the tax money whatever government is receiving, it is going to spend only. Yes, people may not be able to spend it because they don't have that much disposable income, but where it is going to government, and what government will do, it will spend only. So ultimately there is no big difference what some other people argue. But however, government spending investment multiplier effect will be lesser compared to the private spending always. That is another argument. So definitely progressive rates of taxation, higher rates of taxation will cause, we are talking taxation here means progressive taxation is what? Income tax always. We are not talking indirect taxes here. We are talking about direct taxes. Progressive rates of direct taxes, income tax, cause leakages, and that might reduce the multiplier effect. And that is one of the reasons why multiplier effect to be increased, what government has to do, they have to reduce the corporate rates, tax rates. That's what government is doing if you observe. What is the purpose of that? That may finally tend to increase the multiplier, what they try to do. So a lot of things they balance. We cannot look at only one thing and decide that this is a good thing or bad thing. Everything is interlinked with each other. We are talking about a macro economy, country as a whole. So to be specific, causes for leakages, if you have to look at, one of the causes definitely is progressive rates of taxation. Second, high liquidity preference of the people. People want money with them. Liquidity preference is there. Idle saving, holding of cash balances. People have cash, but they are not taking it out. Particularly we can see now after the COVID pandemic situation, economy is definitely troubled. People are also troubled. People are having some money, but still they are not ready to spend it because they are uncertain about the future. When the uncertainty about future increases, people prefer liquidity to spending. So when the liquidity preference increases, people keep the money idle and hold cash balances without spending it, and that will be having a negative impact on multiplier effect because it also causes leakages. And very important leakage is undistributed profits of corporations. This is definitely one of the worst things that we are facing. Is it good or bad also? We don't know. Understanding undistributed profits of corporations. In India, there are many companies, particularly the software companies, who are sitting on thousands and lakhs of crores of undistributed profits. They have money, they have cash, they have undistributed profits also called retained earnings. But they don't declare all of that money as dividend, and they don't invest also themselves. It is idle. So it's a big leakage. And heavily accumulated undistributed profits of corporations is dangerous. And the same thing applies to even American economy also. Companies like Apple and Microsoft have heavy profits which are undistributed, and that adds lesser value to the American economy, because investment multiplier effect will become lesser because of that, and that's a very big possible leakage from any economy. So that is not a good thing. Undistributed profits of corporations is not a good thing. Then part of that increment in income used for payment of debts. This naturally happens for any company or a country or even a person. When you have income but you are not using it for consumption of goods, you are only paying the old debts that you have taken. Half of your money is paid for old debts only. If you look at India's case, almost the entire direct tax collections of central government are paid for only interest payments. Forget about even repayment of debts. So the interest expenditure of the central government is almost equivalent to the entire direct tax collection of the country for a year. So what all the people put together paying income tax to government, what the government is doing with that money? Just paying interest on the loans that it has taken earlier. So where the investment will come from, where the investment multiplier will happen. So that is a big leakage. And this leakage keeps on increasing when your debts increase. When more and more debts are taken, more and more repayment happens, more and more interest you have to pay. That will reduce the capacity of a country for its saving and investment and expenditure, because most of the money that is earned by the country is spent on those repayment or servicing of debts. Dangerous thing. That is a leakage which is unfortunately happening. See, every country will have these leakages. It's not that India has only, but yeah, it's only about how much bigger leakages we have and how much dangerous it is for our economy by reducing the investment multiplier. If these leakages can be reduced, economy will run, because investment multiplier will be higher. That's the ideal scenario, and that's what they try. The governments try to achieve that if they know all these things. But again, unfortunately, whether they know or not, also not really clear. Yes, top economists are there in the planning department or advisory role, and we have something like Niti Aayog nowadays. I don't know what they are doing and all, but still, whether all these factors are also considered or not is a questionable thing. But if they are considered for a market economy, which we are aiming to be at least, if not already, these things definitely have to be considered, and Keynes theories cannot be ignored. Keynes is one of the economists whom the governments cannot ignore. A lot of governments ignored him, and they paid the price also. Just for understanding, for reference purposes, once again, nothing political. The 2008 economic crisis. Before that, in even America also, a lot of criticism was there on the Keynes type of economic suggestions, and even for that matter, other alternative economic suggestions like Karl Marx communism and all. But in 2008, when the recession happened, a great recession happened in America due to subprime crisis, then people started opening the Keynes books and Marx books once again. Of course, Keynes and Marx are completely opposite. Marx is a communist economist, and Keynes is a capitalist economist. But still, alternative policies and alternative thoughts were required. You cannot just keep on going with keeping everything open to the market and let the market decide whatever it is. Yes, sometimes it is required also to observe interference of the government, which Keynes told also. But point is, when there are leakages, it is definitely the government's job also to try to curtail those leakages. And particularly, a lot of Keynes theories were applied during the 2008 period by the then president of America also. But that is not related to national income, but those are related to the fiscal policies of the countries that we will discuss in next chapter anyway. But coming back to the national income only, What are the causes for the leakages which will reduce the investment multiplier? These are the things. Progressive rates of taxation. People are preferring to hold the cash than to spend, and corporations are holding undistributed profits, not distributing them. They're sitting on a huge pile of retained earnings, and majority of the income is now used for payment of debts only. That is a dangerous thing. That's a leakage. And scarcity of the goods and services despite having a high MPC. That is the worst scenario. Of course, we never had that, fortunately, so far. If there is marginal propensity to consume, people want to consume, people are ready to consume, goods and services are not there. Worst thing. That should not be the case. That generally will not happen also in most of the developed or developing economies. Rarely that happens, maybe in some of the African countries like that. But if that happens, that is a very bad scenario. People want to buy, but goods and services are scarce. That should not be the case. If that is the case, that leads to leakage. That can be called as a leakage, or that can cause the leakage of this national income by reducing the investment multiplier. And very important thing, this is another various aspects we have to keep in mind. Additional income spent on purchasing existing wealth. So wealth creation is what the income should do for future. Buying the existing wealth is not going to add any value. Lot of times people think that, oh, stock market is doing great, lot of economic activity is going on. Boss, stock market may be an economic barometer, understanding or maybe reflecting the sentiments of the people. Yes, to that extent we can agree, but that does not add economic activity to the country. Already companies are there, their shares are there, and all what you are doing, all people are doing, they are buying and selling. Existing wealth, if you just exchange the hands, what is the use to the country? Yeah, some people lose, some people win. For them, okay, individually there may be profits or losses, but country, what it got? What is the additional benefit that the economy got? What is the national income that is getting added because of that? So that is a leakage. Rather than buying and selling shares, if that money is spent for wealth generation, not for buying and selling existing wealth, for new companies to be established, for new startups, let us say venture capitalists, those things are important. Those will not be leakages. Existing wealth, if you are just buying and selling in the stock markets, secondary market, let us say, secondary market is a cause of leakage. Primary market is a fantastic thing where fresh investment is made, fresh investment is raised, and that will be spent on increasing the national income for growth and development of the country. That is good. But existing wealth just changing hands will not have any great thing. See, with this, we see all these various items, right? Some company has purchased another company. Let us say recently, Adani has purchased some 70% of shares in the Mumbai airport. So what? So what happened to the country? Did it add some great value to the country's economy? Nothing happens. It is just a headline. Okay, fine. Just changed hands of existing airport from GVK to some other company, Adani. So what? Existing wealth changing hands is not going to be adding value to the national income. That is a point to be noted. So these things only may be headline managements. We may say, oh, that happened, oh, this happened. But at least people who understand macroeconomics, they should identify changing hands of existing wealth is not wealth generation, Baba. It is the same pie. People are eating. They are not changing or increasing the size of the pie. Only who eats will change. Earlier, GVK used to eat, now Adani will eat. What country got? Nothing. That's the same. So, that is not going to add value. That is a possible leakage. And unfortunately, this is happening in India very heavily. That leakage is very bad. So, undistributed profits of corporations and additional income spent on purchasing the existing wealth is a very bad situation, definitely condemnable, and which has to be changed to some extent for promoting the fresh investment rather than just changing hands of existing wealth. Anyway, end of the day, these are conceptual and these are applicable everywhere in the world. We are not looking at only India. We are taking India as an example because it is our country and we know how this is happening in this country. To some extent, whatever we know, we are trying to understand it. More than that, we should not keep much of an attachment to the reality when we look at the theories. Theories are theories. Only for understanding them, we sometimes look at reality, but not that we learn theories from reality. That is not correct approach. So it should be other way around. So these are the various theories and various concepts. Two-sector model of Keynes. What will be the aggregate demand function in that, what is the consumption function in that, what is the saving function, what is marginal propensity to consume, marginal propensity to save, what is investment multiplier, what are leakages and how these leakages are caused. These are all part of two-sector model of Keynes. With that, we will conclude today's session, and in the next session we will continue with the three-sector model and so on, four-sector model also we will discuss in the next session. Till then, take care. Bye bye. Thank you very much.